Dion White. I'm pleasure to host this evening. I'm from the newly announced merger today with Hatch Roberts Day, and it's a delight to be able to host this event on behalf of Open House and Brickworks, and particularly the two esteemed guests this evening, Pete Lee and Julian Boletaire. So look forward to hearing what they've got to say tonight about future City Perth. I'd like to begin just by acknowledging traditional owners of the land that we're on tonight and pay my respects to owners past and present, elders rather. Firstly, thank you very much to Open House and Brickworks, and particularly to Carly, who's recently announced her retirement after an amazing 10-year effort, and to Brickworks and Darlene in particular, both organisations and individuals just really tireless supporters of promoting great design, and really I think getting that message of great design out beyond just the professional circles into the wider population, and really getting the public engaged in what great design means, not just architecture, but particularly in light of tonight's discussion, city making. So I guess in chaos there's creativity, and certainly tonight's a great example. Obviously recent events with COVID we've been pretty fortunate with, but great to see the opportunity to take a little bit of a pivot on how we might host these evenings, and welcome to our remote viewers, and particularly to the satellite out at King Solomon Bayswater. Fantastic example of the creative ecosystem in the city, so I hope everyone's tuned in and enjoying what's happening over there at that great venue. It is actually really quite an honour to introduce these two chaps. I have had the good fortune of working with them on a couple of occasions over the years. Pete and Julian are going to give brief presentations, then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. First up is Pete Lee. I think everyone in town would know Pete, and I had the good fortune of working with Pete about 10 or 15 years ago on the Serbia Pavilion site, and really just blown away by what a strategic thinker Pete is. It was really an amazing career experience for me. But also really just watching Pete and the contribution he makes to industry in all manner of ways. Obviously been a pretty driving force of Hassel and its national and international endeavours, which is a great story, but equally day in, day out with committees and boards. Open House is obviously one, but Committee for Perth, many other boards and panels that are really, again, an important part of the creative ecosystem of the city. And obviously with Pete, I think probably more so than anyone in the city has had such a massive impact on the key major projects. So he really is a driving force and legend, and look forward to hearing what he's got to say. Over to you, Pete.
Cheers. Oh, thanks, Dion. I've loved working with you too, mate. It's been really good. So Carly asked me to speak, so we all do what Carly tells us to do. So I try and avoid these things a lot, and I also think that unbuilt works, I've always said it's a bit of a failure, but I've looked through for this project, for Putty Lee, Spowes, BPA, Putty Lee, Spowes and Hassel, and we've actually got a lot of unbuilt works, so, and some of it's not bad. So I pick projects where the sites are still open for something to happen, so it's not a waste of time. Someone can take up the idea or see that there's something useful there, or where we had learnings that were valuable, which I think is important, that sometimes you do things and that they pop up somewhere else later. So I'm presenting 8 projects in my 20 minutes, so I'll talk faster than usual maybe. 2 power stations, 2 bridges, 2 projects in the middle of Perth on the waterfront that could easily be developed, I think, without upsetting anybody about lawn, and 2 at the end. So there's things that we can do that way. So I think that might make sense when you see where we're coming from. There's a couple of other bits. They're all, apart from one on the water, which hopefully might be useful. Once I knew Julian was talking, that might make more sense. So, whoops. So power stations. So the first one is the East Perth Power Station. So about 20 years ago, we did the stabilisation works, which was $16 million then, which is a new roof, replacing all the glass, stopping some of the concrete cancer so that the building would just hold up and wasn't rotting anymore. It was in a really bad position. position. And then in, I think it was 2013, Linda Dorrington from Form came to us and said there was an international group who were looking at a gallery which would attract a lot of people to Perth, and we were thinking about where we could put it. So we actually thought the East Perth Power Station would be a great opportunity to put something really special. The group was, I'm not allowed to say who it is, but it would have attracted millions of people to Perth. It was a really sensible opportunity. At the time we worked through the project that I'll show you, we took it, I actually did a feasibility which Adrian Finney told me was pretty good, so we could trust it. And I took that to Kim Hames, and we actually, with Peter Prendeville, who was the head of tourism then, and Kim Hames, who was the Deputy Premier and the Minister for Tourism, agreed that if this group came to Perth and spent $318 million on the building that I'll show you, they might give them the rest of the land, which is a bit like the Stokes Forest deal at the moment. And so this is what we did there, and was look at what is it about West Australia that's actually really different than other places. Our land is really flat, it's horizontal, it's sculpted, even the mining is all horizontal and those things. So we worked on something that would be about this place. It was for a Indigenous gallery, World Indigenous Gallery this was talking about. So we thought if we're doing something in Perth, we would do something that was really about Western Australia. So I'm showing this one because what we learnt here went on to the project of the stadium that we did with Cox and HKS. So that horizontality, that's what you actually see in the outside of the stadium. It was, talked about being a cray pot, but it's actually the sculptured side of West Australian landscape and the big sky and those things, which came from a little bit of that sort of discussion, which we were able, with our friends at Cox, to take into the scheme at the stadium. And then the museum echoes that same horizontal banding and strength that came through. So whilst we didn't get this opportunity, and maybe Stokes will do something spectacular there, which is wonderful, it wasn't a wasted time. So it was unbuilt, but it wasn't wasted. And we took the landscape around, so we're adding value back through the rest of the site. You would go up to the top and then wander through the galleries, and the Oricom did the structure. We were hanging the buildings as they went down. So it was a really seriously put project. Inside would have been pretty spectacular in that space for events. The back, where the tin is on the side, we were putting offices and space and then opening that space out. So it was a pretty amazing opportunity to work on. It actually won in the Chicago Athenaeum Museum of Architecture Award in 2016 for unbuilt projects. So it was really well thought of. And it would have been spectacular on that side. Along with this, the idea was, because Form run the Spinifex Gallery in Port Hedland, so it was an idea that if you got people to come here, we would try and link to other parts across West Australia. There was something in Laverton and other things. So we thought in Port Hedland, where the Form have the Spinifex Gallery, because the marina was being built, we could actually put a wonderful gallery down at the old boat launching ramp. So we thought, once again, well, what's it about Port Hedland? What's the space? What's different about that place? What can we grow, understand from there? And it's a little bit more fluid and a little bit more organic than what we talked about previously. So that grew into this project, which went along with the submission to the art group that we were talking about. And I thought this was really picking up. This is 7 years ago, but it was picking up on Core 10 and working out how we could include Aboriginal art and landscape into that project, which would have been part of that project. The next project talk about is South FREO Power Station. We were involved a few years ago with Landcorp to look at trying to make this work. Power stations are on the water. The water actually comes in from the ocean into the bottom of this building, and it's like a cathedral inside. It's just spectacular. But there's so much space and it's in such disarray. We actually got Heritage Council to agree to us inject a building at the back half, so the front section was really open, and put apartments through that space, and then really celebrate the link to the water. This washed its face, so sometime when we're throwing cash around at the moment, this would be a burster of a job to actually spend some money on, I think. To be able to really It's like a cathedral, this building. It's absolutely monstrous inside. It's like, 35 metre high ceilings and space and all glass. So you can imagine being on the water then, and then on the back, out of the wind, being able to enjoy that sort of space, and then at night, really bring that part of it. It's next to Port Coogee, that sort of part of the city would be amazing to bring together. So bridges. Bridges are pretty important, and they're really good when architects get a shot at being involved in them. The first bridge I'll show you is a losing bridge. So at the stadium, there was 3 groups were shortlisted to do this bridge. It had to be 45 million, had to be finished in a certain time, and the whole discussion we had about Indigenous stories, mending and healing at the stadium, all of the artists that were involved, was about listening to Aboriginal people. They'd said you could put 7 points in the water and rely on that, and that's all you should do. It was all negotiated. So this is what we put forward, doing the 7 points, launching it from either end. It had to curve up to 6.6 metres underneath, like the Windham Bridge, and then curve down, landed close to the stadium, and that was the way that the space was taken care of. The bridge that was picked was because it was big. It was 2 years late, missed the opening of the stadium. It was at 90 million, didn't get clad, and so people say they like it. I just understand that maybe something like this might have been a bit clever at the time, so I've never obviously got over that. So this is the way we were looking at it. We had Peter Farmer look at the artwork on the top. We put shade through there. It was a concrete, incrementally launched bridge that landed on the right spots. We didn't have to fill in 2/3 of the river to build the thing and then take it out and have dolphins trapping fish on the edges. It was a really disastrous sort of construction program, apart from being 2 years late. So I think this was a gentler touch about it. And you could certainly light it up, and wasn't trying to compete with the stadium. It was a little bit gentler. Anyway, I'm obviously still upset about it, so we'll move on. The next bridge is the 3-point pedestrian bridge, which is between Chidley Point, Point Walter, and Point Resolution. It was proposed it's pedestrian and cycleway. It's something we did with WSP for the Transport Department. And it is still a possibility of coming off. It's 2 kilometres long, it's 20 metres above the river, and they wanted something spectacular. So this is what we produced. I think it'd be beautiful. It could create a great walkway around that bay and be something spectacular. So it was good to have a shot at doing something that was a beautiful piece of design, I think quite powerful. And they did use it on the front cover, so obviously they quite liked what we'd done. Now the next one I want to talk about is in the middle of the city. So back in the last century, I don't know whether it was Putty Lee or Spowers, we did the submission for the convention centre, the losing submission here, and it was with Norman Foster. So this was the scheme that we came up with. Fosters were working on the building, Leighton with a contractor involved in it, and so Andrew Lowe, so Howard Putty was dealing with Leighton, Andrew Lowe and I were doing the urban design link, that sort of understanding of Perth and what it meant. So what we did was we talked about getting rid of that bridge on William Street, changing the road pattern onto the foreshore so that you could rely on the tunnel and work about getting traffic around that way, and then using the other land at the end. So bringing the convention centre right down onto the water and landing it there with glass all around and servicing underneath. I'm talking about this because I'll show you what might be possible in the future, which is picking up on the same sort of ideas. So that idea was that you would flow through a parkland, the roads were underneath and servicing, and then into all the exhibition building spaces were in the middle, and there's restaurants and bars all around the edge and things that were interacting with the water. And that idea of this, what's on the bottom is where Elizabeth Quay ended up being. That was what was planned back at that site. And then taking part of the site going up to the Emu Brewery site where there was more development and urban design going back to that part. So, and that's how it would have looked from South Perth. I talked about that because we were then commissioned a few years ago. Chris Malsom, who was with us at the time, led the project for for what might happen there. Now, I can't show you the plan, so I've stuck a couple of things over the top, but you know, the architects amongst us will be able to figure the rest out. So we did Darling Harbour, where we built exhibition buildings on top of each other. So servicing underneath, an exhibition building 17 metres high, 4 columns in a huge space, and then we put another one on top. That allowed in Darling Harbour for us to put the conference centre and the theatre facilities back in and put the road systems back in. So it became far more permeable. So that idea of what would happen if we did that in Perth, because the convention centre is 20-something years old, I think, it's a bit too small for the big exhibitions that come through. So for us to think about what would happen in this space, and you can see it's about twice the size of Elizabeth Quay. We start talking about bringing the city back down to the water. You can have the exhibition centre, but you can go past and enjoy and deal with whatever's happening there. So it's a different way of looking at a difficult site. And you know, that might create a great residential precinct right on the front of the city, touching the water. What you would lose is a couple of traffic lanes, a new convention centre. So I think that there might be some positives. And even, whoops, not sure what's happened. Oh, okay. So we also did the underground railway station in the city and the one at the Esplanade. And when we did it, we had a titanium roof that, you know, we pulled the building up, so we didn't have half the size of a railway station underground is mechanical plant and air conditioning and things. So when we pulled up so it was naturally ventilated, we saved all that, and we had a beautiful roof over the top. The first thing that happened when that project happened was they cut the roof off to save $2 million. So it's one of those. So this wasn't what it was like, but this is what could happen if you start doing that sort of development down there. You could create a great precinct that's at the front of the city. These are things that great cities would do, and we've got huge opportunities in our city. The next one is a concert hall, which has got a car park in front of the concert hall. So we were engaged by a council to look back at this time because they needed to put a lake for irrigation somewhere, which ended up being what happened at Point Fraser, but which is lovely, and there's a little bit more landscape through there. But our idea was put the lake in front of the concert hall, bring the plaza out over the top from the concert hall, put the road underneath, and then the Lyric Theatre. The first convention centre had a Lyric Theatre in it. Lyric Theatre's been flopping around for a long time, so put a Lyric Theatre there, maybe the State Theatre when this was done, and maybe ballet down the front. But you would be losing the car park. You can do things like this without upsetting anyone about lawn. You can do the car park, you could actually do something. And that great concert hall building just could really be celebrated. So you can imagine being there, hanging out and watching out to the water, and buildings. You know, you could do great buildings. This was just talking about the lake here, but the idea that you could have that, and then maybe from the water you could really celebrate that place, to be sheltered from the southwesterlies in that space. So the idea of engaging the water rather than somewhere to park shouldn't be that controversial, I don't think. And the ends of the city, right? So I think I've got a few minutes left. So there's things that happen at either end of the city which are a bit left off. We've got such a long city. We need to concentrate in the middle. We need things to happen there to really make the city strong, but we shouldn't forget the end. So WATERBANK 9 years ago we won, so this is still unbuilt. But the idea of next to the causeway on that useless piece of land which had nothing on it, of putting a beach and putting jetties for people to come and go and really engaging and putting some people down there is a really good idea. That was the scheme that we won it on, which is a little smaller than where it sits at the moment, but I really loved that. I thought it was a really good approach to getting something interesting happening when you come into the city. And we do have, we do have approval for the first couple of buildings, so hopefully this won't be unbuilt for too much longer. And yeah, so the last thing I want to finish with is Parliament House precinct. A few years ago, when Steve Woodland was the government architect, we went through a process which was actually about the House of Representatives. There's not enough room in the current House of Representatives. As the state's grown, we've got more representatives and the people sitting out the back, basically. So this was actually about creating a new House of Representatives which is to the lower down from where Parliament House sits in this. I can't point to it at the moment, but in the diagram. And then there was a link that went up to Hale House, which was where the Prem would be. Then where Dumas House was, we were putting a couple of smaller buildings so you could accommodate all of the... This is a big city thought about when you're going to put Parliament all together, all the ministers, all that around that sort of parkland, and then bridge over the freeway so that you have a space above there that becomes a people's place. So I think this is something we should try for our bicentennial. We've got another 9 years. People think about the Indigenous Cultural Centre for the bicentennial, but that's really the wrong date if you think about it, about Invasion Day or when we came or something. So we should do an Indigenous Cultural Centre, but not to about that date. So I think this is something where we could mend that whole... There's lots of schemes being done. They're all pretty good. This was one that I thought was pretty spectacular and worth talking about, because if we need to mend the ends and get those links happening. So you could imagine a people's place where people would come to protest and those sorts of things in the front of Parliament House, where, you know, off to the left is the new House of Representatives, and then the link straight up to where Hale House, which is the only thing that's actually been done from this. So I think I'm on time.
Awesome.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Look, some great schemes there, Pete, and I should say it'd be great to see some of these hit the list for the, maybe the Stimulus Mark II and certainly the bicentennial. We've got a lot
We're ready.
And no doubt our next speaker will be really building on that water theme, and obviously a pretty unique part of the relationship within the city. Julie and I first met probably 10 years ago working on the Bentley project, and was just really struck by how thoughtful Julian was in terms of just the rigour and the humility and the skill that Julian put to that work with his team. Audric, I think, as you all know, have made a massive impact, I think, on the professional landscape in WA, and particularly the design literacy within, particularly the planning fraternity, which I think is a bit of a work in progress, and we can keep working away on that, but certainly really changed the way, I know personally, and for us as a practice, really approach the conception and communication of design work, and I think really responsible in a lot of ways for people trying to visualise what a future Perth might look like at a big level. I think, as I shared with Julian earlier, he's obviously a prolific writer, and there's a bit of a standing joke in our household among my teenage daughters that Dad owns a lot of books, but he doesn't ever actually seem to read these books. He just collects them and occasionally flicks through them. I did, however, pick up and read the first chapter of Julian's book, which he's going to talk about a little bit tonight. And again, that first chapter called Hesperia was, you know, to me, a really thoughtful piece about the ancient origins of WA, the dark and confronting past, I guess, of the colonial years, and some really interesting comments about, I guess, the confidence of Perth and what it means to consider some of these projects that Pete's taken us through, and what does that mean for the future possibilities. So looking forward to hearing from Julian.
Thanks, Dino. That's very kind words. So what I'm going to present today is a whole series of what-ifs for Perth, and particularly the foreshore, but present them as kind of emblematic of different ideas of what Perth was or could be. So they're different alternate futures for Perth which didn't come about, but they are revealing of what was going on in the collective psyche at any one point in Perth's insecure kind of imagination of itself. It's from the book Take Me to the River, if you're interested in another book that no one will read. So look, just to set the scene here, the Swan River is this kind of muddy, meandering river. It doesn't look very spectacular. It's been flowing for 60 million years, which is a little bit hard to conceive of, but it's eroded a canyon in the edge of the continental shelf, 5 kilometres northwest of Rottnest, which is bigger than the Grand Canyon. That's how long this fairly modest-looking muddy river has been meandering. So a truly ancient river. So the book, the presentation, is about how we've related to that landscape and its people, the Indigenous people, who understood the river to have been, and all the water bodies of the southwest, to have been created by the Woggle, this serpentine creature here visualised creating Perth water, Bunanbiro, and Melville water, and then descending through the cliffs in Mount Eliza. It goes without saying we're standing on Whadjuk Noongar land. To pick up the story from colonisation, the French came here and correctly understood the Swan Coastal Plain to be ecologically barren from the perspective of European agriculture at least. But Governor Stirling and his crew came after the end of an uncommonly moist and cool summer, and the whole thing was very green. They sailed up to Guildford, did their only soil testing in the area that had the only good soils, and presumed the whole lot was going to be that good. But they fell in love with it as a kind of botanic paradise. Stirling said the richness of the soil, the bright foliage of the shrubs, the majesty of the surrounding trees make this as beautiful a spot as anywhere I've ever witnessed. So they really got carried away. It was a case of seeing what you wanted to see, perhaps, rather than what was there. In the evenings, cool winds would blow from the east as they camped near Guildford and along the river. And Stirling, I guess in the first sort of what-if kind of hypothesisation of the Swan Coastal Plain, predicted there must be a snow-capped mountain range somewhere to the east of Perth, which was producing these cool winds. There it is. He was intoxicated with the beauty of the river. At least he sold it to people back in London and England as being an Arcadian botanic paradise. And people got, the aspirational classes projected all their longings and desires onto this beautiful landscape and then came out here in droves, and then quickly realised it was actually quite problematic. It was quite hot. It generally wasn't very green. And quickly the river became problematic. But the first scheme for Perth, which is this one drawn up here in 1833, the Arrowsmith Plan, had Stirling's St George's Terrace, which was to be a large park, extending from Point Fraser in the east, you can see, through to what now is William Street in the west. And this was this idea of enshrining this botanic paradise at the foot of the city. So not industrialising the waterfront, that was going to be Fremantle. This was going to be a beautiful riverside park. In typical Perth fashion, when he went on holiday, his surveyor, Septimus Rowe, flogged it off for real estate, and it quickly became entombed under urbanity. But Stirling came back from his holiday incensed, and he bought the grounds which became Government House out of his own money, because that was the last remnant of this what if. The book visualises all of these things as what they might have looked like in some alternate future of Perth if we'd been able to see beyond our own short-term gain, which caused Karl Marx to cite Perth as an example of the failures of capitalism, funnily enough. But this is the scheme which it could have been if Stirling had had his way. St George's Terrace, truly being a terrace, overlooking the river, overlooking a magnificent, topographically varied park which would extend right down to Point Fraser. It would have been a beautiful thing, not this vacuous tabula rasa that we currently have. The first what if, I guess. Of course, then Perth lacked public open space. And so Kings Park was too far away, Queen's Park was way off in the east, and so there was a desire to have public open space. So we started to fill in between William Street and Barrack Streets with street sweepings and horse shit and sand, anything we could find, and we started to build the esplanade for those who remember it. Now, that was, I guess, to some degree a success, but we then, the next big what if was Frank Vincent from 1931, a local engineer, felt that we needed to keep the boys busy in the Great Depression. He proposed a 120-hectare island in the middle of Perth water, which was going to have golf links for the busy city man, an aerodrome, shopping centre and suburban housing along city beautiful kind of lines, and you can see the image of it there. As he said, what is the use of our courses if it causes us to be we admire financial depression, let us therefore secure our progress. And we thought that because of the cost of paying the land, might have actually really seriously developed over time. It was a logical place for the Crown Casino, building on the idea of Casinos Island, Macau, for example. It could have been abhorrent, but certainly an interesting proposition. There were calls in the West Australian paper that he'd be lynched. It was regarded as an outrage. It's the beauty of Perth. Now, we never did build Perth Island. We started filling in lots of the river edges, hundreds of hectares, which you can see in the kind of browny colour on those diagrams on the left. A muddy business. It caused huge outbreaks of algae because of the sewage treatment plant river, because of shallow waters and washing out the shallows. So much was a stench that was regarded as silk black, according to the housewives of Melville, South Perth, as stench emanating the foreshore. But this isn't what we did. We reclaimed, we sterilised it. We got rid of the central neatly covered with a veneer of turf and clan. Then that kind of whole job lived because then we had this kind of vast expanse. No one quite knew what to do with. This was an early scheme. who victoriously fought off this and had the what is now Riverside Drive downgraded. Ashton McDougall for the Carpenter government. Okay, was a sleep water. Got carried away like for the someone's failing right up and from there, and it was popular, but it tagged you on Swan, press and it never recovered because the xenophobic bad ideas come from Perth. Great change, a potentially beautiful scheme. Reinforced the political dimension of planning in Perth. The Labor was voted and came in Barnett, who wanted to cancel it, run to it, hit from the different at his and convinced we do something around Perth. I said, Circle 2, he did say this, Circle 2, but there were practically not so much debt. Yeah. So City Vision were there on the edge, sort of, lobbing their 2 cents worth in. They came in with this scheme of extending Riverside Drive over the inlet in a feature Calatrava style bridge, keeping a bit of space and the ceremonial space for the Anzac Day ceremony, which makes some sense. And then the city gatekeepers, who were at a whole other level, got pretty fired up about, it wasn't so much a one kind of nuclear holocaust, their ideas about Perth, which was what development, and all of these things got caught up in it. No wonder it was controversial. Ashton Raggett McDougall, it should be said, loved controversy and weren't put on wonderful pavilion buildings, which got ultimately taken off Ashton Raggett McDougall because they're a bit extreme. And it got built, so we can celebrate. We finally built something down there, so that's good. If I have 5 minutes, I'll just quickly look forward, and 7 of them. And the Elizabeth Quay had one in the second stage of works, which has been kind of handballed into the distant future. Some of that impetus has migrated for the City of Perth Mayor position I've been talking about, moving people on. There's missing another one. Thank you, Peter. I should have put that on. But that's a thing going forward that I think is a what if that shouldn't remain a what if. The other thing, nature is a good bookkeeper and she has a long memory. And this will be a humbling experience for the city. It's not to say you can't do things on the foreshore, but they need to be designed to accommodate this kind of rise. This is 1.1 metre. You can imagine what a flood looks like, on top of this, or a storm surge. So it could be lots more dramatic than that. At the same time, where that Perth is experiencing, and I should say has experienced and will experience significant population growth. So how we use the river to draw people out of the suburbs into a higher density setting is something that needs to be explored, and something certainly that Hassel's work around the conference centre, shows us how it could be done. So there's all these issues, and what we really need is a kind of a scheme to coordinate all these what-ifs around Perth water. We've always sort of Perthed it by just doing it in little incremental kind of moments, but this is a sort of, it could potentially be a giant urban room. And so we need to think of it more in that way. And it's certainly, you know, Elizabeth Quay is quite an achievement, but it's only 300 metres of some 8 kilometres of edges, let alone the rest of the river, you know. Lisa Scafidi said for the, I think it was the bicentenary, she thought we could do with a Statue of Liberty-like thing in the middle of Perth water, which would act to kind of draw everyone's gaze into the middle and help to unify it as a kind of space. But it was very difficult to think, who would that figure be? And because given what the city gatekeepers think when they go to Elizabeth Quay, and it's actually quite nice, people seem quite happy. But you know, so I think we need to get away from that binary mode where it's thinking it's one or the other. And particularly with COVID, people are realising, well, I can just work at home. So why would I come into the city? I wouldn't come into the city just to work in a boring office building, then catch a train home again. It needs to be thickened up in terms of the offerings. And I think that's about urban activation. It's about things like the noodle markets. It's about spaces like Yagan Square and spaces which are activated and give you a reason to be in the city, you know, other than just, I come here to work. And then tumbleweeds just blow down St George's Terrace after 5 p.m.
Brilliant. Are there any questions from the gallery?
Power station, what unlocks it? South Fremantle Power Station, what unlocks it?
So what unlocks it? I mean, look at the money that's being spent at the moment. We've sat there, you know, worried. The government borrows money at 0.5%. What unlocks it? There's jobs there. You can get something happening. So it's a time to fix things like that before. Like we spent 16 million 20 years ago on East Perth Power Station. You need to actually get in and do things. There's a bit of a problem because of where the railway line goes, so there's a bridge. We've done all that work, but you can do it. That's actually, I think, owned by Synergy. They're not talking. They're telling the government that it's going to be $80 million to fix up the switch station. It's not. It's moved on. This is like, seriously, someone in government just go, you know, bang people's heads together and say, now's the time to actually get going on there, because it's, you know, and a great place for a marina. You know, it's something where if you injected 100 million into that, it would all be sorted. You'd have another suburb on the waterfront. You'd have a whole lot of things happening. You know, it's, you know, we're spending billions of dollars on all sorts of things, and it's one of those great iconic landmarks that will open up that whole stretch of land. You know, just spend a bit of money on those sorts of things. It is, you know, you will create something for all of the people from south of Fremantle dealing with that sort of stuff. It's now's the time for us to create jobs by doing that sort of stuff, I think.
The Synergy was a reluctant player in all that.
Yeah, no, it's government departments not talking to each other. It's not, you know, it's not their problem to sort out or, you know, pass around. Government should actually, you know, one of the best things. So on the Rottnest board, and Michelle Reynolds came out of Department of Premier and Cabinet, was at Rottnest. She's now gone to Perth City Council, right? She's the CEO. So if there's ever a time when the Perth City Council, this isn't South Fremantle, but if the Perth City Council can talk to government and be friends with each other, and Perth City of Perth go and steal a couple of hotels you can buy at the moment and put some people in there tomorrow, not in 4 years' time when you finally get around to building something. You want to solve those problems, and you've got some half a brain, you should be able to do it really easy. And there's lots of things. And that's just another one of those things that don't miss a recession. You know? Don't waste an opportunity when you have a chance to do stuff when
Rail systems and freeway extensions.
there's so much money being spent on Rottnest because we can just approve it and do it, which is wonderful. It's about jobs now, right? So South Fremantle Power Station is, you could get subbies down doing stuff to renew the place. They're good. The infrastructure stuff, which we're really good at, and it's wonderful that we're in that process, they take you a year or so to get going before people are being employed. So the stuff exactly like that, where you can throw something and get things happening straight away, is what we should be trying to do. And I mean, we've been blessed with the federal government and our state government of just spectacular. And so you don't usually say you're proud of the government, or, you know, but we are so, I think they've been just spectacular. It's just that bit extra about being really just getting on and doing that stuff and not getting caught up in the bureaucracy that could really help with things. So it's a great opportunity for us to do some of those things, I think. Totally.
Further questions of these two fine?
I think in Melbourne, when you read about something, it talks about the designer, and you have a debate, and you have an understanding amongst the general public about. And Carly, you have been spectacular in getting general public to understand urban design and the importance of it, and you know how much I appreciate what you've done. We all should appreciate that. That's about an understanding there. But if it doesn't get reported, how many times do you read an article? It doesn't even mention the art. It mentions a builder. The builder is someone out of 6 who got the cheapest price. It's not the person who created this great idea who's going. That's the rubbish that gets fed up. The general public hasn't got a chance. Unless if there was 2 newspapers or someone, Business News does all right and that sort of stuff, but we actually need to say there's a higher level for journalists and newspapers of what they should do. Anyone watch that Murdoch program? That's wonderful, isn't it? That's what an Australian's done to news around the world. So there is a responsibility as professionals to say there's a story in here, there's something higher and a bigger quality about what's there, so that the general public has a chance to actually understand that there are different things, there's good things, there's things you like. What is it you like about places? Understanding that, not just that the phones didn't work for the first month at Fiona Stanley Hospital. That's what they get to see, I think. So, sorry, Julian.
I think there's a role for design vision. I think back to some of the things I present. Frank Vincent at his Ireland, that got published in the West Australian. But even the City Vision proposal from '89, that got on the front page. And I think we're confronted by so many problems that it's easy to get paralysed and think it's all somehow too hard. But I do think designers and design vision can play a role in sort of projecting these futures, which might be something that we're not just trying to avoid a problem, but actually aspire to and be aspirational. So I think there is a role for design vision, and I think it's then about being able to understand the ecosystem of Perth and know which journalists you need to ring and which buttons you need to press, because it is still very much a kind of club here, But I do think there's a role for design vision in that. But I think all of the stuff you've been doing in nights like tonight just builds a kind of collective conversation that, when I'm feeling cynical, I think goes nowhere, but when I'm not feeling cynical, I think does build a groundswell, and things actually do happen. Finally, just when you think they never will.
Thanks, Jim. I needed that.
I have really enjoyed this evening, and thank you very much for that. And you've answered a few of my questions, because I was asking myself, well, what is the relevance of a CBD in this age we live in, where we can work from home? I can talk to someone in London and I can sit in my house all day, but I guess it's the public interaction that also, ironically, at the moment is something which may not be possible for many people, but is perhaps valued more because of that. And of course, I support architects and architecture, but I wonder if architects suffer from people simply not knowing what we can do and what we are capable of. Do you think that's the case? We've become less in the public sphere because of whatever reason, less understood?
For a long time, I don't think our buildings were good enough, but I think they are nowadays. And I think when people love going to the stadium, they could actually catch a bus and a train and it works all right, and it's not the end of the world. There's not 7 million car parking bays there, and people learn and they understand they like something about somewhere. And when they want to find that out and they want to understand it, we're all here because we care. We're trying to do something and tell people about things. So that's important, but it's pretty hard doing it if you haven't got a big voice about understanding that. But people vote with their feet. They kept going to Melbourne because it was they want to come back here, and gee boy, we're spoilt. So, and people overseas are going, well, New Zealand and Perth are pretty great places and things. So it's actually, it'll be interesting to see what happens when, if we ever open up our borders. So I think we have a great place here, but people are starting to understand that the built environment, there's places they like and places they don't like. And when they go to places, Brookfield Place is only one of 3 in the world where Brookfield put their name to something. When people come and they start liking things, then developers and everyone realise that you better do something good, otherwise you're going to go broke. So it builds, it'll build. But I'm too old to wait for that. Julian's a bit more patient, but so I'm a bit frustrated. But it's so much better. We've been in the city for nearly 30 years. It's so much better the last 5 or 10 years, despite all the things at the moment. It's still much better than it used to be when Jeff Kennett came here. So.
as to the CBD, you were saying in the context of the pandemic, what role does it even play? We just finished 2 national scale surveys, and interestingly, 25% of people said after the pandemic they were less inclined to live in an apartment. 50% said they were less inclined to catch public transport, and 40% said they were more inclined to live in the regions. So huge, potentially huge change in sentiment. Maybe that won't change behaviour in the short term, but it shows that I think a lot of our planning around transit-orientated development, sticking people on top of public transport, is a little out of step with the times. And I think it indicates that given the ease of remote working and the fact that you might just decide to do it from 2J, I think the city will need to work harder to provide more things to draw people in. And there's plenty of ideas of how you could do that which are floating around. But I suspect we're going to need to thicken up those opportunities, not to make the city viable, but to make it really hum.
You know, the fact that the government's announced that city deal's been around for a very long time. They've gone, you know what, we actually have to do something to save the city, and you know, putting a university in here and those sorts of things happening. That is, you know, that's a big step, because this government's been less about the city and more about, you know, suburbia and those sorts of places. That's been popular. That's a $1.5 billion investment in the city, understanding that the place needs to really get on. So that's a really wonderful recognition that it's important that the city really survives. Yeah.
Okay, I think unless there's one more burning question, we all done? Well, I certainly was pretty excited at the prospect of coming along tonight, but really, really appreciate the perspective you've both added and some great questions and reflections on all of that. So thank you both for taking the time to come along. Thank you again to Open House and the wonderful Carly Barrett and her team, and also to Darlene and Brickworks for continuing to, you know, spread the message. I think it is all about communication and raising awareness around design. I think, you know, we've come a long way in a very short period of time, and these sort of things are so important to that. To Darlene and Brickworks for your support as well. Tough time in the industry, but to continue to do this is great for you guys, so to do that. So thanks all, and we'll wrap it up. Enjoy a drink.